I'm going to teach you one of my most powerful tools as a physical therapist and strength coach. Now, chances are, if you found this video, you're looking to improve your mobility in some meaningful way to maybe address some pain or tightness that you've been having that is holding you back from the goals that you want to achieve. There is no shortage of mobility videos on YouTube or in the internet in general. But here's the thing, these videos and just people in general will give you 3 random exercises to improve hip mobility or improve shoulder mobility. But the reality is you don't know how to tie that into your main plan, to your goal of getting back to doing what you want to do. And it's frustrating. You spend like 20, 30 minutes in your workouts doing some I shouldn't say pointless. No, honestly, doing some pointless movement prehab exercises thinking that, all right, I'm just going to do this and I'm not going to make any changes to my programming and I'm going to get better. The reality is what gets measured gets managed, but if you don't even know what you're managing, there's not even any point in measuring it. So in this video, like I said, my most powerful tool as a physical therapist is actually mobility screens. But I'm going to teach you mobility screens in a way that you know they're going to carry over into your main goals. Because another thing, you're going to hear on the internet that there's half of a camp that says mobility is the silver bullet to all of your problems. You have to fix your mobility or else you are screwed. And then there's another half of the internet that's going to say mobility is completely useless. These screens are a waste of time. You should just be loading through lengthened ranges of motion to get stronger and get more mobile. Now, I'm sure you, my fellow critical thinker, can recognize that the answer is somewhere in the middle. We do not want to view these mobility screens as the silver bullet to all of our problems, but we also don't want to just throw them out the window and ignore the usefulness that they have. So we're going to go over 10 mobility screens that I use with patients every day to help them get out of pain and get stronger. But before we get into any of this, you need to know that this is just one piece of a bigger picture. When it comes to assessing your issues, you have to also understand beyond mobility what strength deficits you have, what endurance issues you might have. Are you having technique issues? How's your lifestyle? And how are you mentally dealing with all of this? All of those factors play a huge role when it comes to managing any related issues that you have when it comes to trying to get stronger in the gym. So with this very small piece of the puzzle, let's go over 10 mobility screens that can help you address pain and stiffness in the gym. So the first thing we have to talk about before we get into the 10 screens is understanding the usefulness of the screens and what they actually cannot do for us. So when you're about to use these screens, you have to ask yourself, when you perform this screen and you get a certain result, does it relate at all to what you're experiencing? Can you even change it? And can you scale it to get back to where you want to be? If the answers to those questions do not have any hope of progressing you forward, the screen is not worth your time. But if you go through some of these screens and you're like, you know what, I have that nasty hip pinch in my right hip when I get to the bottom of a squat, and then I did this screen and it's that same pinch, you might be onto something. And the cool thing is a lot of these screens can relate to each other and help you tell the whole story. One screen in isolation is honestly not going to do much for you, but if you see 3 or 4 of these screens are telling you the same exact thing, once again, you might be onto something. Oh wait, to demonstrate the damn screens, I gotta move all this stuff. So as you can see from my shirt, I am a sweaty bitch. Recording in the summer heat's not fun, but the video must get done and I love my logo too much to change. So let's talk about our first movement screen, the tall sit. Now the tall sit is one of my favorite screens because it assesses a lot of things in the lower body all in one movement. So as you can see, as you're sitting back into the tall sit, things like your glutes and your adductors need to be able to lengthen. So the muscles on the inner thigh and the back of the hip, they need to be able to lengthen to even let you get into the position in the first place. Along with that, we also need the quads, so the muscles on the front of the thighs need to be able to lengthen as well to let the knees bend into that deep position. And then you'll have some joint actions like some tibial rotation or basically your shin bone being able to turn. And yes, it does turn, it doesn't just bend and straighten. And then you also have things like your big toe. It needs to be able to bend backwards or extend. And your calves also need to be able to lengthen as well. So you can see in just one screen, we covered the hip, the knee, and the ankle. And some might argue you could even include the lower back, but I think there's other screens that can do that job a little bit better. Setting up for the tall sit is actually super simple. All you're gonna do is get on your knees in a nice upright position and keep your toes tucked, thighs together, and then you're just gonna sit back onto your heels. And some things you might notice, you might feel some tightness in your knees or some tightness in your big toe or your ankle. All right, so now we have the Cowboy Sit, which is basically the big brother of the tall sit. And it's pretty similar. Like, I've had some patients and clients where if they can't even do the tall sit for whatever reason, I don't even try the Cowboy Sit. I already have the information that I need from this screen and probably some of the other screens as well. However, the cool thing about the Cowboy Sit is that it kind of pushes into a little bit more of, hey, this one side's gonna do more of this thing, the other side's gonna do a little bit more of the other things. And when I say sides, I mean one leg versus the other. So if you look at the tall sit, the leg that is up, that's the leg that's gonna need a little bit more glute length to get down into that position when you're sitting back. And the leg that's down actually needs to tolerate a little bit more deeper knee bending and then also some more big toe extension. So bending that big toe back like we said before. Now, setting up for the Cowboy Sit is actually pretty similar to setting up for the tall sit, but we're gonna take that front leg and put it in front of us. The heel of that leg is gonna line up with the bottom leg's knee. So you can see in this video from the side angle, I have my front heel next to my back knee. And then from there, same thing goes. You're gonna sit back and pay attention to what you notice either on the front leg or the back leg. Now, once again, one of my absolute favorite screens is the Shin Box. And now this position might look familiar to you if you've been looking at mobility videos, especially for the hip. The Shin Box looks very similar to the 90-90 position where people will do windshield wipers to open up hip rotation when they're trying to improve their mobility for things like squatting, deadlifting, step ups, whatever. But here's the thing, as an isolated mobility exercise, I actually think the Shin Box is pretty useless. And the reason for that is because when someone is doing things like windshield wipers or 90-90s, whatever you want to call them, they have a hard time controlling the compensations that can happen. Because think about it, you're doing mobility drills to try and address mobility deficits, but those same deficits, if they're stubborn, they're gonna recruit other parts of the body to work around the deficit, so it never really gets worked on. And going back to those exercises, it's really hard to control, for example, like your trunks position, to be able to maintain itself while you're trying to genuinely rotate at your hips. And trust me, I know way more exercises that can get the same job done, is way easier to coach and feels a lot more productive. So like I said, as a screen, I love this position. As an exercise, we have other options. So when you're looking at this screen, 3 things you need to pay attention to: the front leg, the back leg, and the trunk. So the front leg is measuring hip external rotation, or your thigh's ability to turn outwards. And then the back leg is measuring hip internal rotation, which is your thigh's ability to rotate inwards. Now that third thing, the trunk, we're not really measuring anything at the trunk with this screen, but we're using the trunk and also how we feel in the screen to see which side is causing our movement limitation. So if I'm doing the Shin Box and say I feel like a pretty deep pinch in my front hip and I just can't stay on that side, I start to shift away from it, I might want to look into hip external rotation drills for that leg. Or more commonly in my experience is if someone has a pinch or a tightness in the groin or something of the back leg and then they start to side bend, that shows me that they have internal rotation deficits at the hip on that leg. Now, honestly, the easiest setup for the Shin Box is just watch a video of someone getting into the Shin Box and just copy them. But an easy way to set it up is if you're about to sit into like a pretzel sit, like you're sitting in a classroom, you're gonna sit in that position for the front leg and then you're just gonna swing that back leg behind you. I prefer to keep that knee of the back leg measuring internal rotation. I'm gonna keep that near the front heel just for consistency. And then from there, just take notes. Do you feel a pinch in one of the hips or the other? Do you feel like you're bending away from one side or the other? Look at yourself and see what you notice. Now let's get into the spine. So there are a couple different ways that the spine can bend. Obviously, we can go forwards, we can go backwards, but then we can also go side to side or even rotate on top of ourselves. And there are actually some cases like in physical therapy school where I was taught something called a quadrant test where you can actually bend backwards and to the side to kind of test different things. But in my experience, I've never really needed to do that unless it's like very specific nerve issues. And if you're having those nerve issues, you shouldn't even be watching this video. Go get assessed by a medical professional. So let's talk about touching your toes. You can actually break this movement into 3 sections. The first third of going down, the middle third of going down, and then the final third of reaching towards your toes. Because at those different segments of the movement itself, there are different parts of your body that are limiting you. It's not just your hamstrings. This could be a very real reason why you can do all the hamstring stretches in the world, but it's not addressing your ability to touch your toes. So the first third of the movement, we actually want to look at our shoulder blades. If our shoulder blades can't open up around our rib cage in what a movement's called shoulder protraction, and it just feels super tight and tense like a military posture, then you're gonna have a hard time even initiating the toe touch. Then on that middle third of the way down, if your ribs can't pull backwards or retract, kind of like you almost got punched, you're gonna have a hard time breaking that middle third of the toe touch. And finally, the bottom third of the movement, if you can't hinge well or your glutes are super tight and you can't shift your weight backwards, you're gonna have a hard time making it to the final part of the floor. Basically, the toe touch is a really good screen to challenge your base of support moving backwards. And if you have a hard time doing anything that needs to be done to shift your weight back, this screen's gonna give you a problem. So like I said, it's not just your hamstrings, there's a little bit of nuance with each stage of this movement. Now for spinal flexion or the toe touch screen, feet together, one hand on top of the other, relax and try and touch your toes. Don't think of the perfect way to do it. The goal of the screen is just to see what your body naturally chooses to do, so just try and touch your toes. And a key note, just because you're able to touch the floor with the screen doesn't mean you pass. It actually could mean that you need to get stronger. Because sometimes, especially people who practice yoga, they can fold over really easily, but they have no backwards weight shift, meaning that they might need to do some strength exercises like squats or deadlifts to actually get those muscles to do their job of shifting their weight back a little bit better. All right, next we have back extension, or basically leaning back. You have to look at the front side of your body to see why you are not able to lean backwards. So the biggest things in my experience is if the front side of your torso, like your chest, like the chest bone itself or the muscles, don't have the ability to open up, or the hip flexors don't have the ability to open up, those muscles and joints in those respective areas are going to hold you back from being able to lean back. And similar to its sibling, the toe touch, the back extension challenges your base of support, but in the way of shifting forward. If you're not able to shift your weight forward, something's going to go wrong in the screen. So now the back extension screen, or the leaning back, all you're gonna do is feet together, hands on your hips, and you're gonna lean back and see what you notice. If you notice like a pinching in your back or a nice stretch in the front of like your abs and your hip flexors, they mean completely different things. But generally speaking, if I feel weird or off with this screen, I'm gonna do one of my go-to exercises that I'll show you later in the video. Now we have side bending. So once again, we can always hone in on little parts of the screen, but we're gonna miss the big picture of what the side bend can tell us. So with the side bending screen, a lot of times we wanna look at muscles on the side of the trunk. So thinking like the internal or external obliques, and even like the lateral hip muscles, like your abductors, the fancy word for the side glutes. And funny enough, there are things that can even happen at the foot when you go from one side to another, but that's a whole other topic in and of itself. Long story short, we're just challenging our lateral base of support, our ability to bend side to side without losing our balance. Once again, feet together, hands at your sides, and you're just gonna slide your hand down as you lean away from one side, and then just do the same thing again on the opposite side. One thing to avoid, don't just go like this side to side. Take your time, feel out one side, come back to the middle, feel out the other side. And last but not least, of the spinal motions, we have rotation. Now, funny enough, with rotation, yes, we want to be mindful of the torso's ability to rotate, but the hips can be a pretty big limiter in this movement. As you can see in the video, if your hips aren't able to turn towards or away from each other, you might have issues with the spinal screen. And that's why a lot of times you'll see if you have a back issue, you have to screen your hips, and if you have a hip issue, you have to screen your back. A fancy way of saying low back and hip is lumbopelvic, and they usually have a pretty close relation when it comes to screening anything related to these movements. So just keep in mind when you're rotating towards one side or away from one side, you're challenging hip internal and external rotation. For example, if I'm rotating towards my right side, I'm challenging hip internal rotation on that same side and hip external rotation on the opposite side. And now spinal rotation, we're gonna have hands across our chest, feet together, you're gonna rotate towards one side, come back to the middle, rotate towards the other side, back to the middle. Pay attention to what you notice. Do you feel a weird pinch in your hip? Do you feel some lack of stretch in the shoulder blade as you're going to one side versus the other? So different things mean different things. If you feel one thing over the other, you have to do one exercise versus someone else who feels the other thing might have to do something else. Now let's move into the upper body. And there could be specific mobility screens you can do for your wrist or for your elbow, but in my experience, almost 80% of the cases can be addressed pretty well if you look at your shoulder. And not only that, to address things at your shoulder, you need to look at your rib cage and your shoulder blade. Think of that as like the foundation of this building. If the rib cage and the shoulder blade don't relate to each other well, they don't move well, Everything else that is on top of that foundation is going to have a hard time. So if we're looking at rotation of the shoulder, we have internal and external rotation. Those are probably the biggest movement capabilities of the shoulder because it encompasses a whole bunch of qualities. Like for example, in this one of the screens we're going to talk about, for your ability to raise your arm over your head, your arm actually has to rotate at different portions of that lift. And you know what? Let's talk about it. Our next screen of the body is shoulder flexion. Now, similar to our friend spinal flexion, shoulder flexion has 3 phases. The first third, we're assessing shoulder external rotation. The middle third, we're assessing shoulder internal rotation, as well as our ability for the front side of our body, like the muscles of the chest and stuff, to lengthen. And then the final third, at that tippy top, we're also getting back to shoulder external rotation in a higher position, but also upper thoracic extension. So that ability for the upper back to kind of get a proud position. And just to reiterate, if you have an issue at any of these stages of the motion and you're not holding the qualities of the screen, that's what you need to work on. For the shoulder flexion screen, you can do this laying on the floor with your knees bent, feet flat, and just raising your arm over, or seated, kneeling, reaching your arm up and down. Just be consistent with whatever you choose and pay attention to if you notice limitations in your shoulder blade, your lat. Is your body compensating to lift your arm overhead, or do you just feel very limited in certain parts of the movement? Once again, different parts of the movement have different reasons to getting that job done, and if the first third, second third, or third third of the movement have an issue, you have to address it. And our last 2 screens we can bundle together because we have shoulder internal and shoulder external rotation. We have the Apley scratch test. So super simple as well. If I'm reaching my arm over and behind my body, I'm looking at my shoulder's ability to flex, abduct, and externally rotate. So that's just fancy way of saying raise up, move out, and turn out to get behind my head. And then the other scratch test, we have internal rotation. So that's measuring my body's ability to bring my shoulder into extension, internal rotation, and adduction. So fancy way of saying bringing the shoulder back, turning the shoulder in, and moving the shoulder towards midline. And with these scratch tests, I actually want to look at other parts of my body as well. If I'm trying to reach my hand behind my back, my upper back needs to be able to extend or get this proud chested position, or else I'll also have a hard time getting into there as well. And then with internal rotation, if my chest wall doesn't want to stretch or open up, I can just be locked into this position and have a hard time reaching back as well. Performing the Apley scratch test is super simple. All you have to do is take your hand and pretend there's like an itch on your back, reach up and over and try and reach the middle of your spine to scratch it. That's measuring external rotation. And then for the other way, you're gonna take your hand and reach down and behind, trying to reach towards the middle of your spine to scratch the middle of your back. And that's for internal rotation. And now you could do that standing, seated, kneeling, whatever gets the job done. Just be consistent when you retest. And once again, pay attention to what you notice. If I reach over and behind the back of my head, do I feel a weird pinch in my shoulder? Can I not even get into this position? Or do I feel a tightness in my upper back? For the internal rotation reaching behind my body, do I feel a weird pinch in my shoulder, or do I feel very tight in the chest muscles or somewhere else in the upper body? So now that we know what the screens are, how to do the screens, and what they measure, let's go over 7 exercises that can actually cover a majority of these screens. So first, let's go over the seesaw plank. Now, I'll be honest, the seesaw plank, I only use it to improve big toe extension, that big toe bending backwards. However, if someone's like pretty sensitive to things like spinal flexion or that toe touch screen, just contracting your abs and getting it to chill out after a good workout can actually improve your toe touch. So don't knock this one out. It has some pretty good uses. And it's super simple. You just set up in a plank position, feet together, get onto the balls of your toes, and rock back and forth, pushing through the big toe itself. And if this is still really sensitive on your big toe, you might need more passive big toe exercises that you could honestly just Google. Our second exercise that we're gonna go over is the eccentric sit-up. So with this super slow sit-up, I love to use this to improve things like the toe touch. However, as I said before, if you can kind of see the theme, managing home base, which is our hips, our rib cage, and shoulder, can actually work itself into the outer parts of our body, like our elbows, knees, wrists, and feet. So with the eccentric sit-up, if someone has a hard time bracing because of like back pain or they're just not really good at it, this exercise can be a really fun way not only to build up your abs, but also teach you how to build a better brace. And no, I'm not saying you need to brace and strengthen your core to improve every issue that you have. That's also another whole video in and of itself. But I do think when it comes to moving weight in the gym, when you have chronic pain, learning how to brace and when not to brace is a very valuable skill. So once again, another super simple exercise. You're just gonna set up as if you're about to do a sit-up, hug your legs at the start, and then let go and slowly lean back. You don't want to just plop to the floor, especially when your spine starts to get in contact with the ground. Now, I'm not really good at this, but if you can get the control, especially when your spine is starting to hit the ground, it's almost like a domino effect, and you really feel your spine just unlocking as you go. Now, our third exercise, we have Copenhagen planks. You're probably gonna hear me say this a lot. I have a lot of favorite exercises. This is one of my favorites because it covers a lot of ground. Once again, going back to home base, if you can manage the pressure of your body during this exercise, you're gonna improve a lot of things, especially at your hip. So for screens like the side bend or the Shin Box, if you're having issues with those, or even the tall sit, the Copenhagen is a really good exercise to try. You're just gonna set up on the side of your arm, have like a chair or a bench next to you, and you're gonna put your inner knee on top of that bench, and then the other leg that's not really working is gonna go right under. And then pushing through that top knee as if you're trying to force it through the bench, you're gonna lift your hips up towards the ceiling, trying to get your hips higher than the surface of the bench. And if this exercise is appropriate for you and you're holding it, you should feel your inner thigh working pretty well. If you feel something like your high groin or some knee discomfort, this exercise is a little too hard for you. But you can simply just do the floor version. You get into the position of a Shin Box, but then you push through that back leg to lift your hips off the floor, and bam, you have a floor version of the Copenhagen. But once again, if you just Google floor Copenhagen, you'll find it. Now, the fourth, and this is gonna be the last of the lower body specific exercises to improve their mobility screens, we have the reverse Nordic. It does really well with the back extension screen and the tall sit, and also Cowboy Sit. So if you do this exercise right and you feel the quads getting a nice stretch and strengthen in this motion, you're probably gonna open up a lot of mobility. Because having to hold your trunk in a nice inline position as you lean back is actually contracting the muscles of your back. And like we talked about with the other plank variations, sometimes people just need to hold those muscles accountable to their job, and it loosens up some of these motions. We also have the hip flexors because you have to open the front side of your body as you're leaning back, and if you can maintain that upright position without folding over, hip flexors are holding their position well. And like I said, this is primarily a quad exercise, so the quads have to lengthen. And then you're in that tall sit screen position, so being in that position, you can actually get some great toe extension or knee bending. But some people, they prefer to just keep their toes out of it and do the feet flat position, which is totally fine. You can have your toes tucked or toes out, does not matter to me. The money of this exercise really comes from holding that upright position as you lean back. The ankle and the toe are just extra benefit. The next three exercises are gonna be for the upper body. But if you've been keeping up, some of these exercises can actually work into the lower body. And no, I'm not gonna say your one rotator cuff is gonna fix your big toe. Not what I'm saying at all. But sometimes you can sneak in parts of a different exercise while you're working on a different body part. It's actually one of my favorite things to do as a strength coach and physical therapist is to help people find certain exercises that give them the most bang for their buck. I do not have 30 minutes to warm up. I need to hit like at most 3 to 5 warm-up exercises for a set or two to make sure that this is worth doing in the first place. Let's talk about my favorite example of that, the dead bug pullover. So why put you in a dead bug position while you're doing a pullover? Why not just do the pullover? Well, if you're looking at shoulder range of motion, remember we talked about if I pin my shoulders back and I try to raise my hands, my body is pushed forward, it's gonna be hard to get overhead motion. So to improve true shoulder raising motion, shoulder flexion, I need to be able to control my ribs position as I'm moving my arm. And with the dead bug position, just holding your abs in that isometric hold, you're gonna feel those muscles work as you're raising your arm and you get a nice stretch in your lats. And if you're feeling those right muscles work, you're gonna improve your ability to raise your arm over your head. And the cool thing about this exercise is say if you're limited in the shoulder flexion screen, in the first third, the second third, or the third third, whatever, the exercise kind of adjusts for that itself. Like you won't be able to hold the dead bug and raise to the third third of the lift if you're struggling in the first third. It's like you can't put your shoe on until you put your sock on. Or actually, I think a better way of saying it is you can't take your sock off until you take your shoe off. You can't adjust the third third of the overhead motion if you're stuck at the first third. So for the dead bug raise, you're just gonna set up with your thighs parallel to the wall, shins parallel to the floor in that nice 90-90 position. You're gonna tuck your ribs into the floor, like kind of imagine pushing your belly button into the floor. You should feel your abs starting to work from there. And then all you gotta do is reach your shoulder blade towards the ceiling and then raise your arm overhead and try not to let your arm swing out to the side as you're doing this exercise. Next, we have the Beast Plank Scap Press. I love using this to improve the Apley scratch test for internal rotation, because usually if someone's having a hard time with internal rotation, they're having a hard time getting their shoulder blade to protract or push forward. If you can imagine like pushing out of a push-up, that's usually what you'll have a hard time with if you're not too good with this exercise screen. Super simple. Get on your hands and knees, hover your knees barely just off the floor, and keeping your arms in a locked or semi-bent elbow position, start to move your shoulder blades forward and backward. And our last exercise, we have the super simple shoulder external rotation with dumbbell or kettlebell, whatever you want. You'll see the external rotators of the shoulder, they work super well in other bigger motions like an overhead press or a bench press or a row. But sometimes just isolating it and doing it for pretty heavy weight can open up a lot of mobility for you, especially at the shoulder. And you could do this sitting on a bench, laying on your side, or in the position that I have on the camera right now. Just keep yourself in a strict position. Try not to wiggle your torso around and just rotate from the arm as strictly as you can with the dumbbell in hand. If you do this one right, you should feel the shoulder working pretty hard to move that dumbbell. You might even get some shoulder shakes going too. So now we understand the screens. We understand how to execute the screens, what they're telling us, what we should feel doing them, even what feels wrong, how we can address it with certain exercises that we have examples of. But how do I know this is all gonna work? If we go back to the beginning when we said what we're keeping track of when we do these screens, it's telling a story. And with that story, we have the introduction, the big chunk in the middle, and then the conclusion. So we already set the stage with the introduction, which is like, hey, I'm having pain with this, that, or the next thing. And then we have the big chunk of the story, which is the screen itself. Like, hey, let's see if these screens tell us what's going on. But now the conclusion. We're gonna do the exercises and see as we retest the screens if those movements improve. So for example, with our Shin Box, if my internal rotation of the back leg is very pinchy and off on my right side, and I do that Copenhagen plank, and then I retest the Shin Box, and that pinchiness improves a lot, I'm onto something. And that's it. Keep track of the screens that are relevant to your story, see if these patterns line up, do the exercise that should clear up those screens, and retest. Because once you test, retest, and you get a positive result, you have some really good information that you could build a solid plan off of. And one last thing before we wrap up this video, please, please, please remember, I'm not saying that mobility is gonna be the silver bullet to save all of your aches and pains. What I am saying is that mobility wins, especially early on, can be such a satisfying win when you've been dealing with pain for a very long time, or you're just having a hard time getting into certain movements that you really enjoy. Like for example, deadlifting is one of, if not the most frustrating lifts for me to do. But if I do a nice Copenhagen and I really get some length into that adductor muscle on the inner thigh, I can get into a sumo deadlift position pretty easily. And then from there, I just need to make sure that I have solid programming to allow the deadlift to adapt to those new positions. I'm not spending hours or, well, technically 30 minutes. I'm not spending 30 minutes warming up. That's usually what a lot of people do. I'm doing at most 3 to 5 exercises, 1 or 2 sets per exercises, and they're not even that demanding that they need rest. You can go back to back, and this should all get done in about 5 minutes. If any of this takes longer than at most 10 minutes, you're doing way too many exercises. You need to narrow it down. And one frustrating thing about these screens that I really didn't talk about was, what if some of the exercises don't cause any changes in the screen? That is kind of the annoying part about this, is the test and retest to kind of trial and error your way to see what works and what doesn't. And honestly, that's where I come in. I've been doing this screen for little years. And a lot of these screens, they have a lot of cool exercises that can cover like almost all of them with one movement, depending on your story. And with it being my job to do this for people, I can find these changes pretty quickly during an assessment. And that's the cool thing. Once you find like a handful of exercises that takes you at most 5 minutes to warm up with, we form a plan together to make sure that these things last for the rest of your life, so you don't have to keep doing these screens for the rest of your life. The goal is for me and a lot of my clients to just get in the gym, do our thing, have fun, and get out. We're too busy to spend hours in the gym. So imagine being able to go in, follow a certain amount of warm-up movements, and then go do a plan that you enjoy. I'd like to say that's something I'm really good at helping people do. So if you're curious about that, please send me a message. I would love to chat with you and see if it's a good fit for you, or if you just have questions about what I do in general. Getting stronger with chronic pain is a very possible thing. This is one of my strongest tools to make that happen. So once again, I know lifting with pain can be a very frustrating thing. Hopefully these screens and some of these exercises can take a little bit off your plate. And if you have any specific questions about certain things going on, or you just have any general confusion about the screens themselves, leave a comment. We can chat it out and see how these things can apply to you.